everybody. I'm Harinisa Abbas, and we're here today with Samie Al-Achrafi exploring the future of leadership and hashtag Time for Humanity. This time, we're going to be zooming on how to future-proof your organizational culture. Samie, welcome. And what intentions do you hold for us today?
Thank you, Harinisa. Great to be with you. My intention for our session today is for it to be useful. So maybe unlearn, relearn, share some latest survey data if that's useful. So yeah, I'll summarize it in one word: to be useful.
Thank you so much. So we have one question already, Samie, that was raised up by Saleh Al-Zajali in Oman. And he asks, many companies are either undergoing transformation or preparing to. How can we future-proof our organizational culture, taking into account the various changes to the business that are occurring?
It's a great question. So from experience, I think the secret to navigating organizational change efforts is to lead with empathy and that sense of humanity. It's like how information is communicated to employees during a change matters more than what the information is that's communicated. I read a recent survey that suggested 69% of leaders were either going through or planning to launch a change effort, and yet only 50% of those executives said that they had given thought to the team's sentiments about the change. So I know change is complex, but the rule of thumb is that the more that you communicate, then the better able people will be able to deal with that discomfort. And you can also use a values and culture diagnostic, for example. So surveys, interviews, exchange sessions can be done. And when you get the data from that, you can start to close feedback loops. So when the leaders go and communicate to the employees, they can address some of the, if you like, hotspots or some of the common themes or questions that are arising so that it feels more relevant. I understand how challenging it is to be a line manager. It's almost like you're sandwiched between the executive team and the employees, and you don't have all of the information. So given that it's challenging, what I used to do to take back control when I worked in corporate was I would run team huddles every week, and I would look at 3 key themes. What has happened during the week? Then in the second theme, I would try to explore how it links to people's values and links to purpose. So instead of saying we're doing this because group has informed us to, or the executive committee has, I would try and find ways to link it to how the customer will benefit, for example, and explore people's experience of that at an individual level. And then the last theme would be potential. You know, what's coming in the week ahead? Where are the opportunities? And of course, what support do people need? What have you found in the Sultanate of Oman, Harinisa, that has worked when you're thinking about all of those changes that are going on?
I think, Samie, I tend to agree with all the points that you highlighted, plus that over-communication piece. I think it's important to keep people in the know-how of what's happening or what's to come, and manage some of those emotions that are going along with the transformation as well. I think that helps to keep everything really intact. Having, internal coaches inside the organization can really help the employees to deal with the various challenges that might come with transformation.
I love that idea of internal coaches. The questions are usually 5 minutes at the end of a meeting, if you're lucky, and it's usually framed, any questions? And a person who's confident, senior, perhaps extroverted will go, yeah, I've got one, and perhaps speak on behalf of other people. Instead, if you're able to create the space for those coaching questions, so instead of any questions, say, so if there was one question, what would it be? If there was one concern or one thing that you would require my support on, what would that look like? And then, can I check in with you in a couple of days? How does that sound to you? So just reframing to using more of those open questions, but also power questions of if there was one thing. Because we are moving towards this age of accountability and ownership. And I've been surprised on my journey. I found that human beings actually seek out accountability as long as they feel that they're safe. They're clear on what their role is, what's expected of them and by when. And very few people, apparently only 5% of the population, enjoy swimming in ambiguity and embracing change. That means 95% of people potentially resist change. So as we equip people to learn this future skill, then it becomes important for us to think about how can we support them as much as possible by providing clarity, regular updates, and again, thinking of that empathy and humanity piece. At a systemic level here, Anissa, to evolve requires us to break free and be disloyal to our current system. Don't underestimate the amount of resistance that people will hold to that as they let go of something in order to identify with something new.
Such insights. Thank you so much for that, Samie. We're now going to move on to the next question that came from Nadia Al-Shamsi in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And she asks, how can we maintain the corporate culture as more contractors begin to replace the traditional full-time workplace?
Wow, I'm laughing because subcontracting was meant to be a solution. And a consultancy company I own, Marmalade Fish, only exists because that solution is needed in the world. And yet I'm finding it is becoming a problem in itself. So very quickly, unintentionally, a solution can become a problem. Well, of course, subcontracting absolutely has its place, as we said. You might want to bring in specialized knowledge, expertise for a temporary amount of time. But like we just said, in this age of accountability, that can't be subcontracted. Everybody in your brand represents your brand. We've seen scandals over the years where there were apparently, allegedly, child labor on coffee farms in Guatemala, or in another country, foreign prisoners were forced into labor to make charity Christmas cards in the United Kingdom, would you believe? And so you find that without conscious leadership, the subcontractors become further and further away from the values and purpose of the organization. And with those added layers of complexity, instead of honoring the intention of bringing in expertise in order to deliver effectively, you find that often things are unclear, values are unlived, and the reputational damage can be incredibly difficult. When I look back to Marmalade Fish specifically, a couple of years ago, contractual obligations were waived because it was deemed that the protests in Hong Kong would be classified as force majeure, and therefore cancellation charges didn't apply. Yet force majeure was also cited for the coronavirus. And I'm beginning to think here, Anissa, is force majeure then everything?
Everything.
Yeah. So I say in the TED talk I did on why business needs our humanity, businesses don't exist in isolation. We're meant to be part of an ecosystem. And I would say, of course, that we just need to find a little bit more of a balance. What's emerging is trustworthiness is becoming more important than even trust in itself. So in that age of accountability we spoke about, more transparency. Please don't try and subcontract under the guise of becoming more lean and agile, when many times we know that full-time employees are being reduced in order to bring in machines, or reduced in order to show an agile organization to heighten the share price.
So true, Samie. So true, unfortunately. But I'm sure with time, people are going to come to a conclusion whereby they understand that contractors are part of a solution, not the solution. So definitely, little by little, we'll get there.
Absolutely. What are you finding from a nationalization perspective? Because sometimes you can have brain drain and the people take the information from the company and then apply, which is great in that, transparency, but at the same time, you want to retain the knowledge and talent. But conversely, you might also find that contractors are staying in positions for several years. What are you noticing?
That's the challenge that I'm noticing, is that when contractors come in, they have a certain competency level that many Omanis cannot be justified to go into the position yet because of not having the full competency available within them. And what they do is, instead of upskilling the Omani, they'll bring in a contractor. But at one point, the Omani is fully capable and fully competent to take the role, but they're just comfortable with the contractor being there. And therefore, they don't do the natural succession replacement of having the Omani take on those particular roles that the contractors do. And it comes down to have that trustworthiness on the national capability that we have in Oman. That's where it comes down to, Samie.
I think that's a really interesting point. And in other markets, it might be that somebody needs to be retrained, or it could be that a certain sector in this post-coronavirus world means that there are so many people who will be able to acquire the knowledge let's say as an apprenticeship, or I think we need to be flexible and provide choice, but it's worth just examining your supply chain. How much do you really know about it? And when you think about purpose and values, how is that being played out if you acknowledge every single person represents your brand and there absolutely is a financial cost to reputational risk?
Well, Samie, again, I encourage a lot of the companies to start looking at their procurement processes and also to look at the side of what capabilities do we have internally in the organization and what potential do we have of the nationals that we have in our organization that we can basically stretch or basically do a job rotation or perhaps do a on-the-job training, anything that can get them out there to start maintaining the type of corporate culture that we're creating in the organization, rather than have contractors who are very basically short-term, and then after that they're gone and they take away what they have been basically with what they have brought or what they have learned from the organization.
Absolutely.
So we have another question, and this one comes all the way from South Africa, from Enzohule Johnson. And the question is, as a leader, how can I ensure our organization is not nurturing the wrong culture? Samie, we can address the white collar and blue collar dynamics here, because that's where she specifically was highlighting on.
Okay. Well, I know what exactly is meant in the question. I try to avoid the language of right and wrong or good and bad, just because it frames me into a place of judgment, which I'm trying to escape on my journey. So I think rather in terms of what the system is trying or needing to reveal to us in order to achieve coherence. If there is an us versus them dynamic in the system, and that could be leaders, employees, operators, technician versus the corporate or office staff. It could even be frontline and back office staff, or in this case, let's say white collar and blue collar. Then you will find that the system goes into dysfunction. There will be some turbulence. And when wholeness is absent, it means health is absent too. There is then disease. So functioning properly, I always say HR is one of those functions that is able to have a really unique insight into all aspects of the business. And if we're able to press pause a little bit and survey what are the cultural blind spots, again, this is where maybe a diagnostic could come in. But I also just encourage people to go into a sensing mode, which doesn't usually happen when we're busy. But when we slow down and we examine cultural blind spots, which I talk about a lot in the book, what happens is you start to see things which always existed, but you didn't always see. For example, HR will have an insight into who are the heroes, who are the zeros, who gets promoted, on what basis are they being promoted, what's the context, who holds the power in the system. And on my journey, I found out that's not always the person with the highest designation. So it's just interesting to scan for how these things play out and what are some of the unintended consequences. What happens when nobody is watching? That's one of the definitions of culture. Or if it comes to safety, what are the processes that are often bypassed? What happens when somebody is faced with a complex situation? Do they stand in front or behind the rules? If HR was to be able to give that strategic advisory consultancy to the business on the cultural blind spots, I think that would be very powerful. And they can also revisit OKRs, which stands for objectives and key results. I mean, nobody needs another acronym, but in my mind, it serves me to think about the 3 M's. And the first is objectives and key results around the M of mindset. What does that look like to empower people, making them emergent rather than deterministic? The next M is mission. How do we look in HR at what the outcomes are rather than ascribing value to outputs? And the last M is measurement. How do you measure movement and behavior, focusing, like driving a car, on leading indicators in front of you, and of course, the lag indicators, so you're able to check in your mirrors and even check your blind spot behind you physically to look at the measurement of what's going to drive you forward, but what are some of the efficiency metrics which are also useful to give to the business?
I truly love that. And what resonates with me the most as well, Samie, is positive reinforcement. How you get your employees to live their values and the values of the organization on a day-to-day basis will also determine whether they will be comfortable enough to cite the wrong behaviors in the organization and try to rectify them. So having a culture whereby it's open for criticism, it's open for feedback, that's very important as well.
I think it's going to require us to shift the way that we've been doing things. At Marmalade Fish, we've been building out mental health solutions because we believe, talking about emergence and behavior, that is the greatest need at the moment that's emerging. When we've had conversations with some people in HR teams, you know, that old saying of, so do you have a brochure? Or send across a list of the programs. And we tried to explain, well, it could be self-awareness, it could be team or individual coaching. It might be something around resilience or emotional intelligence. What is emerging in your system as a blind spot potentially that we would be able to support for you to deliver on the purpose, strategy, and values? And I think this is going to need more bespoke and tailored learning solutions. You talked before about internal coaches. I would encourage also a move towards strategic learning. And I think that's also going to have an impact on MBA programs and executive programs. But overwhelmingly, I think so much of culture sits in language. And I've seen more departments move away from human resources, not liabilities, but assets. What if the department was called human relations or humanity? I don't want humanity to become another buzzword. And yet I think there's a framing there around sitting in the language of a function of a department could be quite useful as we shift and move forward to even think about what do we call ourselves.
Samie, that's very interesting because I've seen a shift. We started off as personnel, we went into human resources, and then we moved on into human capital. And now the it thing is people and culture. I would suggest, Samie, that I'm noticing over a period of time, this word culture is becoming also a buzzword. What are your insights on this, Samie?
Yeah, purpose, culture, humanity. I'm seeing an awful mental health. I'm seeing an awful lot of the use of a word, which is fantastic for awareness. But I think to go back to the harmony, coherence, and balance, maybe we just need to examine, are we still in a space of balance? Because culture, if you like, is the meteorology that produces the weather. It's deep and it's systemic. It involves sociology, anthropology, psychology. I bring in my philosophy degree, would you believe? So the depth of culture means that it can't always be honored in a tweet or in a quick post. So I'm not saying don't talk about it. I think it's fantastic over the last 5 or so years that culture has literally become to the forefront of a conversation. And yet, I think we could do an even better job of explaining how it really is the competitive advantage by going deeper and then marrying the solutions to actual problems rather than creating solutions that go around trying to attach themselves to problems.
Very profound learning there. I have another question, Samie, from Nabila Al-Bulushi. She's also in Oman, and she asks, what frameworks can we put into place to support workers as more machines come into the workplace? And here, Samie, I have noticed that there's been, as we are becoming more technological, there's a need to have even more human connection. Could you speak onto that, please?
Absolutely. Well, there was a PwC future of, I think it was customer experience study that was done, and 75% of respondents said, I will want to interact with a real person more as technology improves. I think that's a huge and fascinating insight. And what we've seen in coronavirus with limited individuals being able to go back to the front line, often it was the supervisor that chose not to go back and coordinate it from a distance. But that framework isn't going to set up your front line for success unless we've truly moved to the culture of accountability. Excuse me. And we said we're still on a journey to get there. I heard somebody say the other day, if you want to bypass the AI, the robots, when you call your bank, just say the word fraud and it will take you to a human being. If human beings are sharing those tips and tricks, it tells us there is still a need for humanity. But don't read my book if you're looking for frameworks and models, because what I've learned is, unless you have already connected with your personal ethics, unless you're a conscious leader who is truly curious and you are passionate about awakening and leading in a different way, then it's going to be very difficult to find a way to bring our humanity into the workplace. There's no framework or model that can look after your humanity. And I have to say to you, the last couple of weeks, I've had some rather, I'll call them interesting customer experiences where, to be honest with you, I would have rather dealt with a robot than a human being who was unreliable, giving incorrect information, wasn't dealing with me in a professional way, certainly not showing those uniquely humane qualities, which are empathy, compassion, and creativity, our ability to apply meaning. The things that make us human have not necessarily been demonstrated. And my sense with that is there are moments of brilliance happening all around the world.
Mm.
Robots are consistent. Humanity is inconsistent. But it's our inconsistency that makes us magical. I was watching a BBC production a couple of weeks ago. I think it was called Amazing Hotels, Life Beyond the Lobby. And there's a couple of presenters and they fly to different parts of the world. The last episode was actually in Oman at Jebel Akhtar. But on this particular episode, they were in South Africa at different hotels under the umbrella of a company called the Royal Portfolio. Well, a shout out to the owners. They just blew my mind. A little bit like the Ritz-Carlton, every single employee knew what the purpose and values were of a company. They were able to just recite it, and you wanted to see the care that the gardener gave to nurturing the roses in the garden, or the water conservation whilst cleaning the windows because of the drought in Cape Town. And I think the presenters were kind of trying to trick out some of the employees. They realized they were part of the ecosystem. So they were giving food and education back into the townships, which support some of the workers and their families. And the presenter said, so I guess this is linked to your purpose and values. And they recited, yes, too specifically, to uplift local communities and to promote conservation and the environment. It just made me proud to share a planet with these people. So a shout out to them.
Wow. I can tell you, Samie, one of the things that I've taken from what you've just narrated right now is how you turn what is just words into livable values and into livable actions. You know, you talking about how they're catering to basically washing the windows while conserving the water, at the same time, how they go about, picking up the rose garden, all of that stuff tells you a lot about the fact that they're living their values. It's not just, a statement that most organizations put there as a mission and a vision and, and a purpose statement. No, they're actually living it. So that's beautiful.
Absolutely. And I used to work at Disney World, as you know. I used to work at Emirates Airline. And often I hear people come back with, well, our organization is not aviation. We're not in entertainment or hospitality, which the perception is lends itself to showing up with your humanity. I think those are excuses to keep ourselves small. I think that the conscious leaders, our growing community of people ready to challenge the status quo, they accept there's always space. They call it freedom within the frame. If you're clear on what's expected, but you give some freedom within the frame, I believe people will show up, regardless of the geography or sector.
We're going to continue exploring the future of leadership and how to future-proof your organizational culture, looking into topics like diversity and inclusion, purpose, how to manage upwards. Looking forward to seeing all of you then, because that's it for today. I hope you've all enjoyed it. If you have, please like, share, subscribe, and press the notification bell. And please keep the questions coming in. We love them. They're so insightful.